thank y'all for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. This is a gorgeous facility. I've never been here, but it sure was easy to find, too. I usually get lost wherever I go, but turning around, I was right here on it. I look forward to being here for several months now, and I appreciate the opportunity. I'm in the Opelika Auburn News every week. Some of y'all may read me on Wednesday in the Opelika Auburn News and on Alabama Public Radio. But I come over quite often. Actually, I told Bill Wall and his wife a while ago that Mr. Pete Turner was my seatmate in the House. I served in the House 16 years. Any of y'all know Mr. Pete? He's 99 years old, turned 99 January 1st on New Year's Day. And I was telling Mr. Waller about that. The interesting thing, I'll repeat this, I told he and his wife out in the hall this story. I thought Trump gave the best speech he's ever given last night. It was well written, well delivered, and one of the things I liked about it were the anecdotes about historical perspective and different stories about people. And Ronald Reagan started doing that. He was the one who started telling anecdotes about different people, bringing them into the State of the Union and so forth. But I thought the one on D-Day and the Jewish gentleman who was saved from the Holocaust last night was so poignant, and it was just almost tear-jerking. I thought that was the best part of the speech. He covered a lot of aspects, but having said that, a lot of you, some of you probably hadn't, but some of you know a lot of people who served in World War II, and they really were heroes. I mean, they saved the world. They saved the Jewish race. They saved the whole Europe and everything else. But I was thinking about that. I was telling them in the hall that seems like every man I knew who served in World War II had developed hearing problems as they got older because they were around all those guns and everything. And Mr. Pete had a hearing problem. I sat on the left side of him, and he couldn't hear out of his left ear. And Miss Kay would try to get him to get a hearing aid. He wouldn't do it. And Wallace would have me down there a good bit, but he had me and Pete down there one day. Wallace was governor. And Wallace was in World War II also. He didn't fly planes, but he packed parachutes into planes. And anytime you were around the planes that often, it affected the hearing. Well, actually, Pete and Wallace both were deaf. They basically were deaf. And they were down there, had the funniest conversation you've ever seen in your life. Pete was telling what George Wallace about his garden here in Auburn, and Wallace was telling Pete about some bill, and both were agreeing with each other. It's like Pete was sitting there saying, well, you ought to see the tomatoes I grew, Governor Wallace, in my garden. And then Wallace was sitting there telling him about some bill we ought to vote for. And I was a young man. It was the funniest conversation I ever saw in my life. You should have been there. I wrote this book about 6 years ago. I'm proud of really the people who wrote the foreword. Ed Bridges, who headed the archives for 30 years, and Senator Richard Shelby wrote the foreword for the book. And it won the History Book of the Year from the archives that year. We had a good tour around the state, and I enjoyed doing it, and I'm still doing some of it now. As you know, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't. But anyway, talking about that book, the reason it's named that is I just wrote it, Alabama Political Stories. The publishers, New South Books, gave it the name Goats and Governors. Obviously, some of y'all have been around, so you know why it's called Goats and Governors. Y'all would suspect that. Y'all know it's Goat Hill, and this book is about different governors. I get asked this question in some far corners of the state. If you're in Huntsville or Scottsboro or somewhere like that, they don't know what you're talking about Goat Hill. Does anybody y'all know why it's named Goat Hill, don't you? Andrew Dexter sold that land in Montgomery where the Capitol is, and it's a simple answer. Goats graze there. That's where the goats graze. Montgomery was a rural place, and so it was called Goat Hill. And he sold Goat Hill so it's named that for a reason, not because politicians are a bunch of goats, but they probably are. But having said that, it's not named for that reason. It's named Goat Hill because goats graze there. So maybe I taught y'all something today. How many of y'all knew that? Y'all all knew that anyway. Anyway, some of young people and some people in the northern part of the state don't know why. That's why it got named Goats and Governors. But I also go into aspects of telling people why and how governor's races were won and how they won it and this sort of thing. Since we're in Lee County, I don't know if y'all know the story of Fob James elected as governor in '78. You know, Wallace had been governor for years and years and years, and old Fob won the governor's race in '78. We got a lot of former governors around. Fob's around, and Governor John Patterson's around, and of course Siegelman, Bentley, Jim Folsom Jr. We got a lot of past governors still around, but in 1978, and I don't know if y'all know this or not, do y'all know the Diversified Products that Fob James and his brother started was the biggest employer in this county? It was bigger than Auburn University. It was a big, big business, Diversified Products was. And they sold out, I think, to Sears or somebody, or some barbell company. Who bought them out? Do you know who bought them out? Anyway, they made a lot of money. And so some people would take their money home with them and go play golf, but Fob decided he wanted to be governor. So he decided he was going to buy the governor's office. So that's how you win. That's how people win Senate seats and governor's offices around the country mostly. You make a lot of money and you can spend whatever it takes to win. That's quite a luxury when you've got the money and you can just pay someone to run your campaign. And for example, in '78 when he beat the 3 Bs, if y'all recall, it was Albert Brewer, Bill Baxley, and Jerry Beasley had all been running for governor for 8 years. Brewer had barely lost to Wallace in 1970 and was almost the heir apparent. Bill Baxley was a young attorney general, been attorney general 8 years, been running for governor for 8 years. And Jerry Beasley was a young lieutenant governor, had been running for governor for 8 years. And so it looked like it was called, the media called it the 3 Bs in 1978. And Baxley, Beasley, and Brewer. Well, old Fob decided he was going to run for governor. At that time, there was a brilliant, outstanding media man in Memphis, Tennessee named DeLoss Walker. D-E-L-O-S-S, DeLoss Walker. He was a genius. He was the new media person around the country. He had run 7 campaigns in the South, had taken unknown candidates and elected them either governor or U.S. senator. He was that brilliant, taking people who had never been in politics. So Fob took his money up to see DeLoss Walker in Memphis. I think Walker had maybe done a little advertising for their company, so he'd met him before. And he went up there to see DeLoss Walker and said, "DeLoss, I got about $1 million to give you. I understand that's your retainer if you elect me governor of Alabama." DeLoss said, "Well, let me think about it. I got a perfect record. I don't know if I can take you, but you come back in about a week and I'll tell you." Old Fob went back up to Memphis and saw him and says, "What, you gonna take me or not?" He says, "No, I ain't gonna take you. You can't beat those 3 Bs." And you know, they've been running for 8 years, and ain't no way you can. I'm gonna lose, and I ain't gonna mess my record up. And old Fob says, "Well, I'll give you that $1 million if you'll just take it and consider it." He said, "Well, come back in another week." And DeLoss thought about it for about a week. He said, "Well, I'll make $1 million even if I get a blemish on my record, you know. I'll take Fob's money." And so he took Fob in, but he said, "Now I'm going to take you, but you're going to have to spend a lot of money. This $1 million is my money. Yeah, but you got to spend a lot more of your money to win this race, and I'm going to have to train you. And you're going to have to listen to what I say and do exactly what I tell you to do. Otherwise, I ain't going to take you." You know, political consultants will tell people that. It's like, you got to trust me like I'm your doctor or your lawyer. If I tell you to go spit on the court square at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you do it. You know, because I polled it, and that's what people want to see. They want to see someone spit tobacco on court square at 3 o'clock. You know, I've done a poll on it, and I've been telling you this is what you're supposed to do, or whatever you're supposed to do. Get naked and run through Winn-Dixie. Whatever I tell you to do it, you know. And anyway, Fob said, "Well, I'll do it." He said, "Are you sure?" I said, "Yeah, okay." So he brought it. So you're going to come up, pack your bags, and you're going to live with me for about 3 or 4 weeks. So DeLoss had a studio in his house to show him how to use television and everything. And he made Fob study for about 3 or 4 weeks. And he says, "Now, when I send you out, I'm going to send you out on a school bus. And I don't care what they ask you. You answer it with, I'm for getting back to the basics, reading, writing, and arithmetic. They want someone who's plain spoken, who won't take a position on any issue. You know, you cannot take a position on any issue. Sure enough, old Fob got out there and said, what do you think about abortion, Fob? Well, that's an interesting topic. I'm for reading, writing, and arithmetic, getting back to the basics. What do you think about the road problem? I'm for the basics, reading, writing, arithmetic, getting back to the road. He took that thing and he won that race, and Baxley got in runoff with him, and Baxley had run around the state saying, well, Baxley, Beasley, and Brewer had beaten each other up so bad that I'm sure most people in the state thought every one of them had killed their mom in a bar fight. I mean, it was that bad. I mean, you think it's bad now, but they were beating each other up so bad if they thought one of them was ahead, they'd cuss him and say he killed his mama or something like that, you know, and it went on with it for hours and hours, and then Fob went over here with his school bus. Nobody's bothering him, you know, so he's coming around the curve. Bentley did the same thing when he won the governor's race several years ago. They ignored him, and he came on in there. But nevertheless, they would beat each other up, and old Baxley would beat Fob, beat Brewer, or Beasley up one day, and next thing he'd say, you know, old Fob James would be the best governor we ever had. He'd be the best one. He's the best qualified. He'd be the best one. Well, lo and behold, Baxley had no idea Fob was the front runner, and Baxley was in runoff. What's he going to say? I mean, he run around the state saying Fob was the best man for governor. Fob beat Baxley like a drum in that runoff. So anyway, that's the story of the 78 governor's race. Did any of y'all know the story of the Lost Walker and Fob? Money will do a lot for you in politics. And Fob has a legacy, though. A lot of these governors hadn't got a legacy. You know, you take Bentley hadn't got legacies. Riley hadn't. But Fob, he got that sold an oil lease down there, and I was in the legislature, and we did this. We tied that money up in a trust fund, and that money has been the salvation. Rather than just spending all that money we got from Exxon Oil, we put it in a trust fund. It's called the Heritage Trust Fund, and Fob, being a businessman, realized, let's don't squander this one-time oil money we've set in these rights to Mobile Bay. Let's take it and put it in a trust fund. So that trust fund, Fob James started. So he's got a legacy. He also is the only man in history, and probably the only one will ever be, he was elected governor as a Democrat and as a Republican. So he was elected in the 70s as a Democrat, and he came back in 94 and won as a Republican. State had turned Republican by then, so he ran as a Republican. He was a Republican all along. He just had to run as a Democrat. Anyway, that's enough of that. You know, we've got several governors still living. Talking about Ed Bridges. Ed Bridges and I went up to see Governor John Patterson. Do y'all know he's still living? He's 97 years old, lives up in his ancestral land in Tallapoosa County in a place called Goldville. Y'all know where that is? In Tallapoosa County. And that's where his ancestors were from. He's on his ancestral land up there. And Ed Bridges and I went up there. We were having a conversation with him. Ed Bridges has got a book out. Y'all really, if you want to know about Alabama history, it's the best thing. Ed Bridges is a walking encyclopedia. He is just the perfect, greatest historian I've ever seen. But we were sitting there and talking to old Governor Patterson. I've got a show on public television called Alabama Politics. I had Governor Patterson on my show about 5 years earlier, and we were talking to him, and he's very cognizant, even though he's 97 years old. This is about 3 or 4 years ago now. And we're sitting there. He's got a pet goat. Her name was Rebecca. And she's sitting there in the living room with us when we're talking to him. And that goat followed our conversation. She's sitting there, and we were talking, and when Ed and I were talking, she'd look at us, and then when Governor Patterson looked, she looked like she was part of the conversation. She just moved like this. And then Governor Patterson got up and shushed her out of the house. I said, get out of here, Rebecca, get out of here. And she went out to the window and followed us from a window. She said, Ed and I sat there and looked at her. She was at a window following our conversation. Rebecca was. But, you know, Governor Patterson is the only person that beat George Wallace in 58. You know, Patterson beat Wallace in 58, the only time Wallace ever lost. Actually, John Patterson had the race issue. But this is another thing about y'all's area here. Y'all remember Colonel Floyd Mann, who was a legendary public safety director? He was kin to Governor Patterson a little bit, way off. And he was from Tallapoosa County like Governor Patterson was. But he was a brilliant law enforcement person. He actually made his reputation in that first administration. He became John Patterson's public safety director. He was head of the Highway state troopers and public safety directors, head of the state troopers. Anyway, he at a young age, and Patterson made him his public safety director. But y'all recall, I mean, we lived through the civil rights era, and I grew up when it was going on. And the Freedom Riders came to Alabama, and they came up north in a bus, a Greyhound bus, and they stopped in Anniston first. About 40 or 50 of them, biracially, and they were progressives, were wanting to get people voting, but they weren't well received in Alabama in the 1958 to 62 era. And they got to Anniston, and they almost got beat to death. The people were pulling them out of the thing, and they were had clubs, they were going to beat them to death. And they got out of Anniston real quickly, and they said they're heading to Montgomery. Y'all going to have to protect those people because they barely got out of Anniston alive. And they called the troopers, and they said, y'all follow them with helicopters and that sort of thing, and make sure they have a safe landing in Montgomery. When they got to Montgomery, they didn't have a safe landing. They came to that old Greyhound station behind the federal courthouse, and there was not one Montgomery policeman there, not one state trooper, but there were about 80 guys with chains and clubs ready to beat them to death. And they were beginning to pull them out of that Greyhound bus and start beating them. But, and we'd been just terribly, can you imagine what kind of image we'd had around the country if that had transpired? But Floyd Mann, as the highway director, public safety director, head of the state troopers, he said he found out that there was no protection for him. He got in his state trooper car and drove down Dexter Avenue about 90 miles an hour, hit 3 or 4 parking things, ran right into that group of ruffians, rednecks, and parked his car, almost hit 5 of them, got his pistol out and put it in the head of one of them's head. So the first one who touches those guys' head is going to account for it. And they dispersed automatically. He saved the life of about 60 Freedom Riders. So he became a legend in the civil rights. And for a person in Alabama to do that was, a public safety director. But later on in life, the reason I'm telling you about being here in Opelika, Auburn, is Colonel Mann later on in life was head of the public safety at the University of Alabama. It was a cushy job, and I was actually going to school at Alabama, but I always liked politics, and so I'd got to know Colonel Mann, and I was working for the Dean of Students, and I'd go down to his office and visit with him. He'd tell me old stories. And I'm going to tell y'all one that was one of the best ones I've ever heard. It's a true story. Y'all going to love it. He was chief of police of Opelika at a real young age. I mean, he was in his late 20s when he was chief of police. Opelika's a pretty good-sized town, even was then. And anyway, he said one of the policemen came up to him one day and said, "We got a problem, Chief. We got this, big old policeman we call Biggin, weighs about 300 pounds. He said, he's got a bad habit of going down to the depot. Y'all know where the depot is in Opelika. He said he goes down there on Saturday night and wants to beat up hobos just for the heck of it. Just beat them up. I mean, just beat up hobos just for the heck of it." And Floyd Mann said, "I ain't going to put up with that." So sure enough, he followed old Biggin down there one Saturday night, and Biggin drove his car real slow and got out and started rattling boxcars down at the Opelika depot. And about where that restaurant is now, some of y'all frequent. Anyway, Colonel Mann was sitting behind the bush watching him. And sure enough, he got to the third boxcar, and the door opened, and a pistol went right between Biggin's eyes. An old hobo in a real country says, "Mr. Policeman, I've heard of you, and I'm here to tell you I got a dead mama in heaven and a dead daddy in hell and a sick sister in Columbus, Georgia, and I aim to see one of them tonight." And Colonel Mann said, old Biggin sort of backed up and said, "Well, tell your sister, hope she gets the feeling better." Sort of broke him of that after that. But anyway, we've had I tell folks that the reason I wrote that book, I wanted stories saved about our political past. I would contend that we in the South, during the era most of us grew up in, remember an era when people really ran for governor with country bands, and they came to the courthouse square with their band, and Wallace had Minnie Pearl, and Big Jim had his band called the Strawberry Pickers. But that was common all over the South, you know, and I would contend that our politicians were our entertainers. You know, we had no major league sports. We had no opera. We had the Grand Ole Opry on Saturday night, but we had colorful politicians. I'm talking about real colorful. Any of y'all from Louisiana? Nobody can compare with Louisiana politics. Earl and Huey Long take the cake. Second to them is Georgia. Any of y'all from Georgia? Remember the Talmadges? I mean, they were colorful. I mean, but both the daddy and the son. Old Herman P. Talmadge would get his suspenders and say, the only friend the Georgia farmers got is a Sears and Roebuck catalog and Herman P. Talmadge. You know, and but they run against Atlanta. They'd cuss Atlanta, wouldn't let them vote in Atlanta. Anyway, took all the power away from them. And anyway, South Carolina had Pitchfork Ben Tillman and Strom Thurmond. Mississippi had the Bilbos. But I would contend we had some pretty colorful ones with Big Jim Folsom and Wallace, especially Big Jim Folsom. Somebody asked me while in the hall, so you kind of tall, aren't you? I said, yeah, I'm tall. I'm 6'5". And I'm usually the tallest one in the picture. You know, I'm used to being the tallest one in the picture. So if someone's tall me, it kind of intimidates me. You know, have Luther Strange used to be, he's about 6'8" or 6'9". You know, y'all ever meet Luther? Anyway, he was taller than me. It's sort of intimidating, but I met Big Jim when I was a young man. It was right in front of the old Gordon Persons building downtown Montgomery, and Bill Baxter being sworn in for his second term. And Big Jim loved old Baxter because they both were progressives. And Baxter was getting inaugurated, sworn in for his second term, and I was down there. Old Big Jim looked at me and says, Flowers, I remember your you know, Richmond was my floor leader from the Senate. My daddy's cousin, Richmond Flowers, was a state senator from Dothan who became Attorney General, and he says, Flowers, how tall are you? I said, I'm 6'5", Governor. He said, ain't nothing, Flowers, I'm 6'9". I said, well, that's pretty tall, Governor. He said, what size shoe do you wear, Flowers? I said, wear size 13. That ain't nothing, Flowers, but he used a more crass term than that. He said, ain't nothing, Flowers, I wear a 17.5 shoe. Can you imagine someone coming to a courthouse square in Opelika, Auburn in 1954 with a Strawberry Pickers, 6'9", 17.5 shoe? He'd take his shoes off, get barefooted, dance with the band, and sing Y'all Come to See Us. Y'all have heard that song, Y'all Come? That was Big Jim's song. He would sing Y'all Come, and he was just completely uninhibited. But he loved people. He was the little man's big friend. He called himself the little man's big friend. He paved the farm to market roads in the state. You know, during that era, farmers couldn't get their crops to the market because they'd have dirt roads and they didn't have a way to get their crops to the market. And so Big Jim knew that. He was the first governor that we had in 50 years that really was elected by the people. We had what I call bourbon governors from 1901 to 1946, and Big Jim it was a combination of the big mules in Birmingham, the big bankers, the big power companies, the big utilities, and big U.S. Steel primarily, and the black belt planters who wanted low property taxes and very little education. They controlled state government. They controlled the legislature. And they would simply get in the back room of a boardroom in Birmingham and select who they were going to endorse for governor. It usually be someone who was a very prominent lawyer with one of the companies or even a bank president or something. Matter of fact, the only governor we ever had from my hometown of Troy was Charles Henderson, who was the richest man in the state when he was elected governor. He owned banks all over the state and owned everything in my county. And he was probably the wealthiest man in Alabama when he was elected governor. But nevertheless, he was, that's how I got. Big Jim went to the people and beat what he called the big mules and big planters. He beat them one-on-one. He went directly to the people, and a lot of guys who grew up on the farm in Alabama had gone off to World War II and came back, and they wanted someone progressive. and Big Jim fit that mold. And he also, I don't know if y'all realize this, not during that era, we were the most unionized state in the South. Does that surprise y'all? Did y'all know that? From one end of the state to the other, every one of our new industries were unionized. Starting in the northern part of the state in Florence, your hometown, Reynolds Aluminum was the biggest business up there, and it was unionized. The Tennessee Valley Workers, every one of them unionized. You go to, obviously, the Opelika tire plant here. Goodrich plant was unionized. Over in Tuscaloosa, Gulf States Paper and Goodyear over there was unionized. The biggest employer in Mobile was the state docks. All of them unionized. But you go to Birmingham, the biggest employer in the state, U.S. Steel, biggest steelworker unions in this country was in Birmingham. So we were unionized all over the South. No other, we had more union members than any other state in the South at that time, including Texas. So we were a very progressive state, and Big Jim was a progressive governor. Had beaten the big mules and big planters, but he had a little penchant for alcohol. You know, Big Jim pretty much stayed drunk his whole second term. As a matter of fact, he stayed drunk most of the time, and he would literally run around the Capitol. You know, the governor's got to sign certain things and say, you know, he's sober today, he's sober today. Give him sign whatever he had to sign, you know, and certain things had to be signed. So Big Jim. But if you put the word uninhibited in a dictionary and you put a picture beside it, you could put Big Jim's picture, because he depicted the word uninhibited better than anybody I've ever seen. I didn't know him, but I mean the stories I've heard, and I've tell him in this book. But I tell you one that depicts how uninhibited he was, as much as anything. Also, the biggest industry we had in the state, besides those unionized plants, was the textile industry. Every town had a shirt factory. Either it wasn't just Monroeville or the Valley or Lynette or places like that. It was every town had a shirt factory. We had the biggest board in my county was a shirt factory in Brundage and Troy when I was growing up. But so the American Textile Manufacturers Association was meeting in Montgomery, and Big Jim was supposed to welcome to the state, saying as the governor. You know, it was big. It was all the textile industry magnates in the state were there. And Big Jim had not seen the speech somebody had written for him. Trump at least studied his speech last night. Trump does okay if he stays on script. He ain't too good when he gets off script, you know, and does all that tweeting, but he stayed on script last night. But anyway, somebody had given Big Jim a speech to give, and somebody written him a real nice speech and handed it to him. He'd been with his drinking buddies down in Mobile for about 3 or 4 days, and he loved to go to Mobile. Actually, Wallace nor Big Jim ever carried any of the urban areas. Birmingham, Huntsville, and Montgomery would never vote for Big Jim or Wallace, and that's the reason Birmingham's interstates were the last built, too, because Wallace says, I ain't going to build them any roads up there because they ain't voted for me. So that's one reason why we got behind Atlanta. For that reason, it was politics. Wallace wouldn't build any roads in Birmingham because they wouldn't vote for him. And but Mobile would. They wouldn't win by much, but Mobile, Wallace and Big Jim would carry Mobile. I think Big Jim had enough drinking buddies he carried down there. I'll tell you the truth, but he was been with his drinking buddies in Mobile, and somebody had given old Big Jim this speech to give to the Textile Manufacturers Association. He had not seen it, and they handed it to him as he got in there, and he got to reading that speech. He says, I want to welcome y'all to Alabama today. He said, we got 400,000 people employed in the textile industry. Means 1 out of every 6 jobs and 13. I'll be damned, I didn't know that. And he threw his speech up in there and said, oh, hell, y'all don't want to hear that anyway. What y'all want to hear is them trying to impeach poor old Big Jim. Them big black belt planters and big mules trying to pitch poor old Big Jim because I'm a little man's friend. I'm trying to pave roads for the farmers. I'm trying to give the teachers a pay raise, trying to let black people vote. And all them black belt planters are against me for that. You know what they're trying to do? They're trying to set a trap for old Big Jim. They got a hotel room in downtown Montgomery. They got whiskey in that room. They got the best whiskey you can find. They got bourbon, they got scotch, they got vodka, and they want to get Big Jim in that room. And boys, next to them, they got women. I'm going to tell you something, boys. If you bait a trap with whiskey and women, you'll catch Big Jim every damn time. I'm going at it right now. I'll see y'all later. That was his speech to him. He said, I'll see y'all later. And, you know, old Bentley, when he was governor, he made a big deal. My book came out when he was governor, and I knew about that girl. I didn't write about it or anything in my column. Obviously, I liked old Bentley. And, they found out about it. It came out, and he started lying about it, you know. But he made a big thing about reading my book. He went online, and he was going to be the first one to read my book and say he was the first one to read my book about goats and governors and everything. And I got to thinking about it when he kept lying about that girlfriend. I finally circled that passage in the book and sent it to him and said, Bentley, you know, they'd like you a lot better if you'd own up to it and just say, if you bait a trap with whiskey and women, you'll catch me every time. You know, that's like Big Jim did. If you take a page from Big Jim, they'd like you a whole lot better. If Big Jim would run for governor and say, I'm going to steal a little bit. You know, I'm going to steal some. You know, I'm going to steal for you and you and you. And I'm going to steal, but I ain't going to steal as much as those black belt planters stole from you. I ain't going to steal as much as those big mules in Birmingham stole from you. Big Jim's going to steal a little bit. You know, speaking of Big Jim being a progressive, I'll tell you a Siegelman story. Siegelman was as close to being a progressive as I've ever seen. I also say Siegelman had the George Wallace syndrome, and that is that George Wallace didn't care about anything but campaigning and being governor. He didn't care about having a dime to his name. He didn't care if he had a meal to eat. He didn't care anything about running for office and being governor. That was his whole passion. Wallace never stole a dime because he didn't want any money. Now Gerald may have, but you know Wallace never did. But he would campaign out. Siegelman campaigned all the time. Siegelman came out of Mobile, out of when he was a little boy running for governor, and he'd started his campaign early on. Siegelman but Siegelman was a real liberal. He was only like a real liberal like Big Jim was. I mean, he'd been a national Democrat. Siegelman had. He'd campaigned for a governor and all that sort of thing. The same way old Doug Jones had. Doug Jones is a real liberal, and he's never hidden from it. But they were from the same, he and Jones are big buddies. Anyway, Siegelman was campaigning for Secretary of State. He'd been working for Bob Vance in the Democratic Party and campaigning for my governor. But he was going to run for Secretary of State as a young guy, and he get first elected office. And you know, Siegelman he went up the ladder. He was Secretary of State, then he was Attorney General, then he was Lieutenant Governor, then he was Governor. So he the only person that ever did it like that. So he elected about 5 to 10 times statewide. But he had never met Big Jim. But Baxley and Siegelman, those liberal guys, they all worshiped Big Jim because they knew he was progressive on the race issue and times. And Big Jim made a speech in 1945 in Montgomery of our Christmas speech and said the reason this state's so far behind is we won't let black people vote. Can you imagine doing that? That was 20 years before they had the right to vote. Can you imagine how unpopular, how progressive that was for that era? Anyway, all of them go to school with us. And so anyway, Siegelman had never met Big Jim. Big Jim in his latter years, there's a lady back here whose family built Big Jim's house from Coleman. She knows the story. There's a truck stop up there on I-65 Big Jim would camp out at late in his life and drink coffee all night long. And Siegelman had been campaigning all over North Alabama, and he spotted Big Jim over there and went over to speak to him. Now, Big Jim was a progressive, but he also was a very pragmatic politician. He believed in helping his friends. And so he went over there. Siegelman was bubbling over and says, Governor, folks, I want to meet you. I'm Don Siegelman. I'm running for Secretary of State. And folks said, well, sit down, boy, tell me all about yourself. Let's hear your story. And old Siegelman said, well, Governor, I born in Mobile, and I went to the University of Alabama. I was SGA president. Then I went to Georgetown Law School. Then I went to Oxford and England and studied. And now I was running for the Secretary of State. Big Jim, that's all good. That sounds good, boy. Tell me again what your name is. He says, Siegelman. And then Big Jim said, You asked me for some advice? Yes, sir, Governor, I'd love your advice. I'd love to hear from what you got to say. Big Jim said, okay, boy, I'll tell you 3 things. I believe I'd change that name to Smith. I don't think that Segelman name's going to fly too well in Coleman. He says, second of all, I don't believe I'd tell him I went to Oxford in England. I'd tell him I went to Oxford High School, if I were you. And third, don't you know you can't steal no money in that job? What you running for Secretary of State for? You can't steal any money in that job. Big Jim trying to get him not to run for Secretary of State. And Segelman was busted, bubble was just burst, after that. From traveling the state, and after this book came out, the most comments I've gotten, several of them, one of them primarily is, I tell the story of George Wallace's prominence and ability to remember names. Any of y'all ever met Wallace when he was governor and everything? He never would forget your name, would he? He had a God-given ability that nobody could ever. You couldn't develop it. Politicians try to develop it. To show you how amazing it was, Wallace was born, as I said, to run for governor. Born in Barber County, and he was had done everything to be governor since he was born, like Segelman. Wallace had done it better. Anyway, he paged in the legislature and all that sort of thing. But then he got ready to got elected to the legislature at 26 for Barber County, and but Wallace had a memory, and he ran for governor the first time in 50 years, I told you a while ago, at John Patterson meeting. And as I'm alluding to, and what I try to accomplish in this book is tell people how it was in that era where you actually would go and campaign one-on-one. They would make 12, 15 stops a day and meet crowds of 400 people. I'm talking about they'd have a country band, and they would have publicized they're going to be in Andalusia at noon, and there'd be 300 or 400 people show up for George Wallace or Big Jim Folsom or whoever was the main candidate for governor. And anyway, you can imagine how many people you met. I mean, they really did retail politics. They shook hands, but George Wallace literally, if he came in here and met you right now, he could see you 5 years later on the street in Opelika and call you by your first name. How many people can do that? But that's how amazing. The story I tell in the book is that let's just say that you're a county commissioner from Geneva County, and this county commissioner from Geneva County, this is a true story, is going up to see Wallace about a road project. And let's say the man behind you there is your best friend. And he said, I'm going to see Wallace about a road for my district. And Wallace is in his first term as governor. And I say that he might have been prepped that you're a county commissioner who's coming to see you. And Wallace bounces out of the office, says, Joe, how you doing? Good to see you. How's your wife, Sally? Very fine. And he said, I want you to meet my friend. Oh, I know, Sam. I met him in 1958 at a fish fry in Sampson. How's your wife, Susie? So he didn't know he was coming, you see. But he said, I met you in 1958 at a fish fry. This is 5 years later. He had met at least 100,000 people campaigning for governor those 4 years. That story has resonated in that same form at least 6 times from around the state. People have given me a story exactly like that. But he became a little bit, as I told you earlier, he had developed hearing problems, and he couldn't hear good, but he also was almost comatose his last term. I mean, he didn't know where he was half the time. And I make the comment sometimes in my column, we really ain't got to have a governor. My observation over the years is that Big Jim Folsom stayed drunk his entire second term. Wallace was on pain pills and didn't know where he was. Bob James went duck hunting the whole time and didn't care about being governor too much. And then Bentley fell in love with his aide. At least Kay Ivey knows where she is. So anyway, I think Kay's going to do a good job. But having said that about Wallace, I had met Wallace when I was a young page. I started page as my representative in Pike County when I was about 12 years old. And he and my probate judge knew I was going to run for politics, and I loved it better than anything in the world. They knew it. And they were training me to run for that House seat when I got old enough. So my old representative would take me to Montgomery with him every time he'd go up there, and he'd take me to see the Agriculture Commission, say, this is my little page, Steve Flowers. He's going to follow me in my house seat when he gets old enough. And he'd go see the highway director the next week, and we'd do the same thing. So one day I had a paper route, and I would carry Mr. Gardner's paper, and our probate judge over on Orange Street, Pat, you know where Orange and North Route Street, my paper route down North Route Street and Orange Street. And anyway, I says, Mr. Gardner was out there waiting in the yard for me. He says, hurry up and finish your paper route. I got a special trip for you. I said, okay. So I got back up to Mr. Gardner's house. He got in the Chrysler New Yorker. We had about an hour drive from Troy to Montgomery. We didn't have a 4-lane highway back then. It was a 2-lane road, and Mr. Gardner would drive about 80 miles an hour in that Chrysler New Yorker. You know, and I thought, am I going to make it up there or not? That's when I knew legislators had legislative immunity, because we passed by our only state trooper in the county named Curly Long, and Curly just simply waved at Mr. Gardner, you know. And I said, Mr. Gardner, why didn't Curly stop you? He said, I got him his job. You know, he'd gotten half the people at the highway department their job and everything, but we went in there and met the governor. Well, on the way up, I said, what are we going to do, Mr. Gardner? We're going to meet the governor. So I meet Governor Wallace. I'm 12 or 13 years old. Wallace never forgot that day. You fast forward 20 years, and I'm elected to the legislature when I'm 30 years old, and I represent Pike County as my whole county and whole, but I don't have enough people in Pike County. I go over and get Barber County in my district. So I have Clayton, Clow, and Louisville in my district. Well, I'm Wallace's representative. You know, so I have Wallace's hometowns in my district. Wallace never forgot that as long as he lived. He thought that was the funniest thing in the world. I now was grown, and I was his representative. But he was a little bit off his game. You know, he wouldn't be able to remember the names like he can now. But if you took 5 or 6 pain pills, you'd be a little loopy too. You know, every day. And he'd taken that many every day, and he'd have good days and bad days. And about like Big Jim was, he'd let him sign it today. You know, he's having a good day. But he would call me down there. He loved to reminisce about that same scene. It tickled him to death that I now was grown. And he would call me off the floor of the house, and he made me a floor leader because I represented his county. And I said, well, I got to take care and do what Wallace wants me to do, so I got to, you know, he's going to bring a lot of bacon home to my district, which he did. Anyway, he says, he would tell me the same story verbatim. He may call me out twice during the week. I'd be on the floor of the house. And he'd get a smile on his face, and he'd have that President cigar in his mouth. He'd be in his wheelchair, and he was on pain pills. And if y'all ever visit old guy in a nursing home, he'll tell you the same story over and over again. Y'all ever visit him? And Wallace was like he was in a nursing home. He'd say, well, Steve Flowers, I remember when you were a page boy, Steve. You know, I was a page boy too, you know. Chauncey Sparks made me a page when I was a little boy, like Mr. Bassett brought you up here, you know. You remember those, Steve? Remember you were a page boy? Yes, sir, Governor. Well, Steve, I'm kin to all those Shepherds and Flemings in the northern part of your county. They're my kin folks, you know. I said, yes, sir, Governor. We know Janie Wallace, the librarian in Brundage. She's my aunt, you know. She likes you very much, and she's an old maid, you know. She's never been married, like I know what an old maid was, you know. Thank you, I'm telling you. You know, my aunt Jenny Wallace is an old maid, you know, in Brundage, and I'm very popular in Brundage. I start my campaigns there, you know, and Chauncey Sparks made me a page when I was a little boy too, and Steve, you know, that boy shot me in the parking lot there in Maryland, like I know why he was in a wheelchair, you know. Thank you. I'm sorry that boy shot me in the parking lot, but I'm a Christian. I forgive him for shooting me in the parking lot, you know, up there in Maryland. But Steve, what do you want to say about today? And I said, well, Governor, you called me down here. I mean, no, it's not something. I mean, you're doing everything for my county you can. I know, when you're giving us roads and everything, and you know, I appreciate that. Next day, call me down there again. Steve, you know, I'm kin to those Shepherds and Flemings in the northern part of the county. They're my kin folks, you know. And remember, Mr. Bassett brought you up here to be a page. You know, I met you. Remember when I was a little boy? Yes, sir, Governor. You're my representative now, aren't you? Yes, sir, Governor. Anyway, one day he got to tell me that same story, and he got a faraway reminiscent look in his eye, and he says, Steve Flowers, how old are you now? I said, Governor, I'm 30 years old. I'm 31 now. I'm your representative, not a page anymore. He says, I've been governor all your damn life, haven't I? Because he was thinking about me being a page, and I now was grown, you know. And I said, well, I guess you be governor as long as I live. Am I going to be governor, Bashir? But he had an amazing memory. That bullet, everything hurt his memory. And pain pills, but that was a lot that resonated. The other one is old Howell Heflin. Y'all remember old Judge Heflin? The stories, he had the best repertoire of jokes you've ever seen in your life. I loved Howell Heflin. He was a legitimate World War II hero. I mean, so many people make it up. People make up their stories about it, but he was a Marine that fought at Iwo Jima, and he was a real military hero. Wounded, he had a Purple Heart. He went back home to Tuscumbia and practiced law up there. He was about 50 years old and was the best lawyer up in Colbert County. He was actually Helen Keller's state lawyer and all the bank's lawyer up there. He was the best lawyer in the county. And you would know why, because he was the best storyteller that was ever born in that area up there. He could spin yarns like you've never seen. He would stand outside the Colbert County Courthouse and tell stories, and he would have 50 people come around and hear him tell stories about different things. And I know he must have mesmerized juries. That's probably why he was so good. And then he went on to be Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court when he was 50, and then he went to the U.S. Senate at 56. Served 3 6-year terms. I got to know Senator Heflin well, and I got a nickname when I was in college because I'm tall, named Tree. And everybody likes to call me Tree, but Heflin would pronounce it Trey. He called me up and said, Trey, come up here and see me in Tuscumbia now. I'm retired. And I drove there one day, and we spent the whole day together. He would retire from the Senate. I wrote a real nice column about him. It was almost like a eulogy. And he says, bring those papers from around the state. And I bring them up there, and he had about 50 of them. And he says, Trey, what did they say about me in Andalusia? He pronounces A's like R's. What about Opelika? What Opelika say? You know, anyway, I read him as judge, great senator, and all that. Anyway, he says, Trey, you're going to write a book on political stories, aren't you? I said, yes, sir, Judge, I am. He said, well, I'm going to tell you what I want to do. I'm going to give you my best jokes, and you can keep them in the back of your book. And so in the back of my book, my favorite jokes, and most of them are Heflin's. He said, but give me credit for them. So I'm here to tell you that Heflin gave him most of those jokes. But Heflin had such a wit about him, he would automatically just make up, he had the wittiest stuff. One day he and John Warner were over in Europe at a NATO conference. Heflin was chairman of the Senate Agriculture Committee, but he was on the Armed Services Committee. And so John Warner was a particularly handsome senator from Virginia, had been married to Elizabeth Taylor for a short while. You know, she had about 10 husbands, and he was one of them. And so he was married to Elizabeth Taylor, one of her husbands. And Warner got up there. He was chairman of the committee. He got to go first. He talked a long time. And he says, and old Heflin got up second. He said, well, I'm going to tell y'all like Elizabeth Taylor told John Warner when they got married. I ain't going to keep you very long. He had an old guy named Ham Bendison he made up. I don't think Ham really existed, but Ham was his favorite guy. I said Ham was somewhat of a backslider up in his neck of the woods and bad to get drunk every Saturday night, but his wife was a pillar of the First Baptist Church. She went every time the door was open. She was head of the Sunday school, and she'd beg old Ham to go to church with her. He'd acquiesce and go about once every month or two. And he was going this particular Sunday, and he was dressed up in his suit and got ready to go to the church. And he'd had a particular bad Saturday night, so he fell asleep in his pew as soon as he got there. And the preacher was giving this hell and brimstone sermon and slammed the pulpit and said, everybody here wants to go to heaven, stand up. Everybody in the congregation stood, but poor old Ham was asleep in his chair, just sitting there, you know. Only one sitting. And the wife looks over just petrified, humiliated about Ham sitting there in his sleep. And the preacher went on with his sermon, got into it more, and said, everybody here wants to go to hell, stand up. Slammed the pulpit, woke poor old Ham up. He stands up in the congregation looking around, and the preacher looks over and says, sir, what you got to say for yourself? And old Ham said, well, preacher, I don't know what we're voting on. It's like you and I are the only ones for it. Said Ham was down in New Orleans one time, and this nun wanted to pick on him, and she says, and Ham was trying to be nice to her, and says, nun, what do you think causes arthritis? And that gave her an opening. She lit into poor old Ham and says, sin, just people like you, sinning, cussing, drinking, smoking, cuss, sin. Sin causes arthritis. Why do you ask? Ham said, I don't know. I just saw in the paper this morning where the Pope had arthritis. So old Ham will have a good time with old Ham. I'm going to finish with one other one that people have wanted me to tell when I get to the three things people have resonated in this book. They didn't know. They tell me about George Wallace's ability to remember names, Heffer's sense of humor, but I tell the story of Big Jim coming on TV and drunk in 1962. Do y'all remember that? How many of y'all, did y'all see it? Did you see it? How many of y'all saw it? At what point did y'all know he was drunk? Right off the bat? It took a while for me. I was 12 years old. It took a while for me to realize he was drunk. Did you realize off the bat he was drunk? Did you see it? Uh-huh. Anyway, people have heard the rumor that he got drunk on television, but they had not actually heard the exact story. I saw it, so I'll tell you the story. I preface it by saying that in 1960, the presidential race was won with television. Prior to that, people had won the same old way, campaigning one-on-one, going on the radio, that sort of thing. But Kennedy beat Nixon with television in 1960. Anybody tell you that? Nixon would have won the race, but they had a debate. And Kennedy was young, energetic. He'd tanned in Hyannisport for about a week and studied up. Nixon had campaigned full-time, had a 5 o'clock shadow. He looked, haggard. He looked sinister, which he was, and he just looked bad, and he did bad. He lost, so television became the medium. You had to have television to win, because it was known that Kennedy won the presidential race with television. So television comes to Alabama in 1962 governor's race. Well, Big Jim had been only one of two governors elected twice in Alabama history prior to that time. Do y'all know the reason for that? You couldn't succeed yourself. You could only serve 1 4-year term as governor. You had to wait out. So Bibb Graves had done it in the 1930s, and Big Jim had done it twice. In 46, waited out 4 years, and came back in 54 and won. Big Jim was coming back for a third term in 62. Well, he had a lot of friends in the country. I can tell you that right now. Paving everybody's farm to Market Road will make you popular. And the rural people knew Big Jim was their friend, and he knew that he was candid, and he wasn't going to steal from them. He was going to steal a little bit, but he wasn't going to steal much of the rest of them. And so anyway, Big Jim was coming back for his third term. Wallace had been his campaign manager in South Alabama in 1954. In Big Jim's second race in 54, Wallace was trying to be a progressive. And Wallace actually was a progressive. We had two wings of the Democratic Party. There was only one party in the state. Everybody ran the Democratic primary. Just the same way that we only have one party now, Republican Party. So everybody, if you're going to win statewide office, you got to run as a Republican now. You got to run as a Democrat then. But Wallace had been a part of the progressive wing, and Big Jim had been in the progressive ring along with Hugo Black and Lister Hill and John Sparkman. But there was a right-wing racist segregationist wing run by Roosevelt McCorvey. It was about 50-50. And Wallace was in the progressive wing that walked out of the Democratic Convention in 1948 when Harry Truman espoused the Civil Rights Platform. That was the issue that broke the South away from the Democratic Party. And it started in 48, and they met in Birmingham, started the Dixiecrat Party. McCorvey and all of them started, and Dixiecrat carried Alabama and 5 deep South states in 1948 because of that. Wallace was in the progressive wing, and Patterson beat him with a race issue in 58. Back to Big Jim's night. He'd been elected governor twice. He had a lot of friends in the country. I can make a speech anywhere in the state. Scottsboro, Geneva. I was in Evergreen about 2 years ago, and I tell them Big Jim stories. And I'll have invariably, I have some college that come to me and say, Flowers, if Big Jim was running for governor, I'd vote for him. He paved my granddaddy's road. And so he'd made a lot of friends, and so the people, and it was for television, so the rumor was they'd tell the country people, he drinks too much. Big Jim's a drunk. Well, they didn't believe it. They said, oh, y'all, you lied about Big Jim. He ain't no drunk. He's a little man's big friend. But television illuminated it. Big Jim told him himself that night. There was a third candidate in that race named Ryan DeGraffenreid. Do y'all remember DeGraffenreid? He was a very polished state senator from Tuscaloosa, young, progressive, very articulate. and he was what would be the Republican candidate now. There was no Republican candidates, but he was the polished, sophisticated candidate. He carried most of the urban suburbs. And so he was in the race running his Get Acquainted race. Well, Wallace and Big Jim were pitted against each other. It was Wallace. Wallace was going to win that race because he had the race issue. He decided he lost to Patterson with a race issue in '58. He was going to capture it. So he had Big Jim beat with a race issue, but most people didn't know that. But Big Jim and Wallace and Ryan DeGraff were coming. I'm already enthralled with politics. I'm 12 years old. I told you I had my paper route, and I'm already pages Mr. Gardner and my probate judge. And so I was campaigning for Wallace because I'd met Wallace, and I had Wallace bumper stickers on my bicycle, and I carried my box for Wallace. First Baptist Church box in Troy voted for Wallace. I lived in the area where the First Baptist Church is. I still live there. Anyway, my daddy was voting for Ryan DeGraff and Reed. I asked Daddy why he was voting for him. He said he was voting for him because he was a businessman candidate. My daddy was a businessman, so he was voting for Ryan DeGraff and Reed. I asked Mama who she was voting for. She said voting for Big Jim. I said, well, Mama, why are you voting for Big Jim? Well, Big Jim also had a reputation called Kissing Jim. He was so uninhibited, he'd come in here and kiss every one of you women. Kiss you in the mouth if you let him. He'd grab you up and just kiss you. You know, kiss. He went to Hollywood, went to New York. He was a bachelor. He became the playboy of the country. He'd go to date Barbizon models, have him on Life magazine, drunk in a tub, kissing Barbizon models, you know. And so anyway, he came to the courthouse square. Mama was a high school. So I said, Mama, why are you voting for Big Jim? Well, he kissed me when I was a high school cheerleader at Troy High School. I said, well, I guess that's a good enough reason. I vote for Big Jim. But I'm the only one can't vote in my family, so Wallace ain't getting no votes in my family, you know. But anyway, Mama's for Big Jim and Daddy's for Ryan DeGraff and Reed. I'm from George Wallace. But I'm campaigning for Wallace, and I hunkered down ready to watch all the shows. They all bought 30-minute live shows on television, statewide television. They're going to be live. DeGraff and Reed had bought a 30-minute show. Wallace had a 30-minute show, and Big Jim had 30 minutes. Had them a 30-minute live show, night before election. Well, I'm camped out in front of my television watching them. Mama's back in the bedroom reading. My daddy's not home yet. And I'm sitting there watching by myself. And Wallace comes on at 7. He does pretty good. He doesn't hurt himself. He does all right. Doesn't have to do much. DeGraff and Reed comes on at 7:30. He is brilliant. I'm talking about he is the new John Kennedy, but the conservative version of him. And he's polished. He's ready. And he got a lot of votes that night. Well, 8 o'clock comes and Big Jim's time. Now, he'd tell you 8 was a little bit late for Big Jim. I hate to tell you all that. He's live at 8 o'clock. But he comes on, and I'm sitting there watching him. If you're on television now, I tell you to look in the camera. Well, Big Jim hunkered down and stared that camera down. I'm talking about and he had back then men combed their hair back. And he had a strand of hair hanging down his face. And he's already slurring his words. He says, y'all know I'm Big Jim. I'm a little man's big friend. Paved all y'all's roads. Gave the teachers a raise. Helped the poor folks. Beat them big mules. I'm a little man's big friend. Y'all know Big Jim. I'm Big Jim. Y'all know Big Jim. I'm going to be y'all's governor again. Y'all vote for Big Jim tomorrow. Then they're going to pull him off and let him introduce his family. Big Jim's going to be the family man. Big Jim had about 7 children, you know. Bama, his third child, just passed away of cancer in Huntsville. We paged together. Little Jim, who was governor, was his first child. He says, now I'm going to introduce y'all to my children. They good little children. I like them a lot. They the best little children you've ever seen. And little Jim comes out. He's my first little boy. He's a good little boy. I like him a lot. He's a good little boy. Come on, Jim. Come on out here, boy. And takes Jim and throws him on the sofa. First one's out of the way. All right. Second one is going to be Jack. And he said, boy, that's a good little boy. I like him too. Damn, he's a good little boy. I sure like that little boy. He's starting to weed with it. He said, boy, what is your name? He forgot his second child's name. And he had 5 more to go. And I went back to Mama's bedroom. I said, Mama, you need to come see this. I believe Big Jim's drunk. And she went in there and looked at him. She said, no, he just acts like that. Took up for him. I said, I don't know, Mama. He couldn't remember his children's name. And she said, well, he just cutting up. I said, okay, well, let's see. Anyway, they had to move him off the child thing because he couldn't remember the second one. He wasn't going to sure enough remember the seventh one. And his name's Skippy, by the way. And so Big Jim starts, he has to, you know, wing it the rest of the next 10 minutes. He's got 10 minutes to wing it because he was going to introduce his children. Well, he gets the thing about, he starts, I guess the liquor was kicking in more and more, and he starts weaving back and forth. And he says, you know, as one count this race, he got mad about George Wallace, because Wallace was running on the race issue. And he says, you know, as one little count in this race ain't nothing but a little sawed-off cuckoo bird. He's a sawed-off SOB, said on statewide television. Called Wallace a sawed-off racist SOB on television. He ain't nothing but a little sawed-off SOB. That's all he is. And you know what he is? He's like a damn cuckoo bird. Wallace is trying to steal Big Jim's thunder. He's just a damn sawed-off cuckoo bird is all he is. You know what cuckoo birds do? They go cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo. For 7 minutes on statewide television, Big Jim sat there and went, cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo. And I called Mama and I said, Mama, you need to come see this. I swear I believe Big Jim's right. She watched him do cuckoo for about a minute. She said, son, I believe you're right. She still voted for me the next day. I asked her, I said, Mama, why did you vote for Big Jim? She said, yeah, I voted for him. I can't help it. Anyway, that's the story of Big Jim. He didn't win anymore after that. It was a heck of a show, though. He ended on a good show. I'm glad to answer any questions y'all want to ask about today's politics or past, anything like that. Y'all may want to reminisce. I'll begin it by saying, well, O'Heffin would tell this story on his congressman from Georgia, went to Congress, and his wife went up there with him, and the congressman got into the good life a little bit and was staying drunk a lot every night and came in drunk every night, and the wife getting tired of it said, I'm tired of you coming in drunk every night. You can't drinking with those lobbyists and everything. And she got real mad and tried to lock the door on him. And he came in one night drinking, fell on the floor. She opened the door when he was trying to get the key in the lock. He's laying on the floor like this, looking up at her, and she said, well, what you got to say for yourself? He said, well, I don't have an opening statement, but I'm glad to answer any questions from the floor. Helping you tell that one on my congressman. I know y'all got some questions about current or past politics. Yes, sir.
Just taking the example of your family, what struck me is that your mother and father and you were from three counties, but it sounded like you stayed real civil. You were able to talk about it.
Oh, yeah.
So,
A lot of husbands and wives vote differently.
yeah. So
They did back then, yeah. Of course, I didn't have a vote. I mean,
how come now it's got to be all one or the other? How
Yeah.
come families get divided at Thanksgiving table?
they do on college football now. They don't take politics as serious as they do college football. I mean, that's the Thanksgiving arguments now. Whether you're from Alabama or Auburn is what amounts to now, I think. Not whether you're from Big Jim or Wallace. Big Jim was really one colorful guy. You can't make up the stuff he did. I mean, a novel, you couldn't write the stuff, how uninhibited and things he did. He ran for Congress at a young age. But he let it go a couple times. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I always thought it was a shame that Guy Hunt, who appeared to be an honest man, actually wound up going to prison. What do you think about that?
I think Hunt and Sigmund went to prison because they're politicians. I don't think either one of them had real bad transgressions. Jimmy Evans was out to get old Hunt. Hunt was a good old guy. I liked Hunt, and I was a floor leader for him, even though he was not real educated. But his wife was the sweetest first lady I've ever seen in my life. I had become Hunt's floor leader, and at that time, even though we might have been Republicans, we ran as conservative Democrats. You remember that era? And so the majority of us were conservative Democrats. There'd be Republicans today. We're about 65 out of the 70 of the House members. So some of us would try to help Hunt as the first Republican governor. I was floor leader for him. His wife was the sweetest lady I've ever seen in my life. I tell you the example I saw. She just exuded Christian humbleness. She really did not want to be First Lady of Alabama. It really almost embarrassed her. Helen Hunt was her name. And my mama had trained me to always tell whoever fixed your supper that you enjoyed it, whether you did or not. Your mama did the same thing. So I had a habit of saying, if somebody cooked, if it was the worst food I ever had in my life, I was told to tell them that it was enjoying my supper, you know. So anyway, Hunt would have us, he took a page from Wallace, he would have us out to the governor's mansion to have supper with him. And one night I was sitting with Governor Hunt at his table, long table, but I was sitting next to his wife. And it occurred to me that that lady was the sweetest, most humble lady I've ever seen in my life. She just exuded genuine Christian humbleness. And I got up, and Hunt was at the end of the table. I spoke to him, and I was going to tell her in a perfunctory manner I enjoyed my dinner because she was the host per se, even though they've got about 15 or 20 custodians or butlers and everything there. A lot of them are trustees, you know, prison trustees that they trust to wait on the governor's table. But anyway, I was trying to find her, and I went back into, and the maids told me she's back in the kitchen. And I went back. I thought maybe she was preparing for the next day's meal or something. And that little lady was back there washing the dishes with 6 maids sitting around waiting. That was their job. She just wanted to be back on that farm in Holly Pond. She didn't want to be bothered. I mean, she didn't want anybody washing her dishes. And that humility, I mean, she just couldn't bring herself to have someone else wash her dishes. Yes, sir.
Could you share some thoughts on Roy Moore?
You know, I'm going to tell you a thing about Moore. He doesn't do that stuff for demagoguery. He really is truly believes in what he's doing. I mean, he is exactly what you see is what you get. I sort of like old Moore. You know, I think he's honest too, and I think that you know, I had him on my show numerous times, and he's not. A lot of people think he does all that Christian stuff for demagoguery, but he's doing it because he's lost his job over it. I mean, when they told him to take that monument out of the Capitol, George Wallace would have taken it out. George Wallace stood in the schoolhouse door, but I'm here to tell you, if they said you're going to be kicked out of the governor's office, you don't move out of that door, he'd run from that door. I mean, I guarantee you, he wouldn't have lost his job as governor over that, but Moore did. Moore lost his job over that monument. That may sound simple-minded, but he believes it. I wouldn't be surprised if he don't run for the Senate next time. I don't think he'll win, but I wouldn't be surprised if he don't run again. That's going to be a heck of a race. It's going to start pretty soon too, against Doug Jones. About several Republicans going to run against him. That's going to be a good. They're all going to kick off pretty soon. That Senate race and then the presidential race. We already got 5 or 6 Democrats already in the presidential race. I know you got other questions about current, but I think Hunt was done wrong, and he actually tried to do some good things too. He passed tort reform, but we did in the legislature. Yes, ma'am.
If I remember correctly, later in 1952, Ryan Reed was killed in a train crash.
What happened was he died in '66. What had happened in Alabama politics, that's a great question, is I told you the big mules and big planters had elected governors, but since you could not succeed yourself as governor, you had to wait out 4 years. So the person who ran second for 30 consecutive years, about 8 governor's races, the person who finished second would be a governor the next 4 years. He would keep running. Wallace had done it. See, in '58, Wallace lost. Big Jim had done it in '42. Big Jim ran second to Chauncey Sparks in '42, and in '46 he won the governor's race. He'd gone back. Bibb Graves had done it. Everybody who'd been governor had run second, but they'd run what was called a get acquainted race. So Ryan, it was called getting acquainted. There was you couldn't immediately get known by television. You'd have to get out and campaign. So if you finished second, you were going to win the next 4 years. And that had happened consistently. So Graff Reed had taken a page from Wallace and Big Jim. He never quit campaigning. That night, the Graff Reed finished second ahead of Big Jim. It was close. Wallace won the governor's race in '62 after Big Jim got drunk on television that night. But Big Jim did not finish second. He finished third. DeGraff and Reed beat him because DeGraff and Reed had done so well that the polished, what would be Republican voters today, the upscale voters in the state, voted for DeGraff and Reed, and he finished second. So he never quit running. He had the governor's race running in '66. Nobody's going to run against him. He was going to win the governor's race, but he was campaigning up in North Alabama. He had a plane. That's how organized he was back then. He had a pilot and a plane. He was flying all over the state campaigning. He had an organization in every box in the state. He had a box in Beauregard. He had a box captain. He was the most organized candidate anybody ever seen. And he had the governor's race sewn up. But it was a real cold March night, real windy, and the primary was in June. He was going to go from Scottsburg to Fort Payne for a meeting, and they told him repeatedly, you cannot take off in this windy weather. You cannot make it over that mountain. And he did it anyway, and within 2 minutes, his plane hit a mountain up there and crashed and killed him. And it was avoiding the governor's race. And that's when Wallace ran his wife, Lurleen. See, DeGraff and Reed was going to win the '66 governor's race, but Wallace couldn't succeed himself. See, Wallace was governor and could have easily won if he could run again, but he couldn't run again. And so DeGraff and Reed was going to win the governor's race, and then when he died, Wallace floated that idea for about 2 or 3 weeks, and they said that dog might hunt. And she won that race against 8 opponents without a runoff. 8 prominent opponents. That's when Wallace had that secession session too. He got every senator and strong on them trying to get them to pass a secession law, but they wouldn't do it. DeGraff and Reed died in a plane crash though. Y'all remember DeGraff and Reed, don't you? Good man. Any other questions? Well, thank y'all for having me. I think we've got some books if anyone wants to get some of them.